What's up, guys? Josh Mason here, sitting with Spencer Feldman of Remedy Link. We are here in Santa Cruz, California, and it's super good to meet you. We've been chatting for the past few years, but haven't gotten a chance to meet yet. And awesome to meet you.
Hey, man.
Yeah, I want to get you on my show to talk about your products and your company and all that you do. So why don't you just start with introducing yourself, how you got into this world of detox, and then we'll start jumping into your products that are right behind us.
Sure. So the story goes back. I was in college, and gosh, 30 years ago, and I think there was a measles outbreak, and we're having one now, right? And so one person got measles, and they decided to vaccinate everybody in the college, and I didn't know any better, so I lined up because if you didn't get vaccinated, they weren't going to let you, continue going. And they gave me a vaccination. And I guess I must have gotten one from the bottom of the vial where all the mercury was, because what ended up happening afterwards is my hands started shaking. But not just a little shaking. They were shaking so bad that one day I was trying to eat soup at lunch, and the soup shook out of the spoon before I got it to my mouth. So, I went to the doctor, and I said, "Hey, doc, my hands are shaking really bad. What's up with this?" He goes, "Well, I don't know, but here's a drug." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, but I'm 20. Why are my hands shaking? I want to understand what's going on." And he didn't have the time, and he didn't have an answer. It was only years later that I finally figured out what it was. It was mercury poisoning, and maybe some autoimmune. But it put me on this path of taking responsibility for my own health, because I realized that, if I was in a car crash or, some serious event, then an emergency room modality was great. I wanted the surgery, I wanted the fluids, I wanted the heavy duty protocols, but for the kind of day-to-day stuff, tired, not feeling well, mood-ish, that kind of stuff, it seemed like the medical establishment, by using the emergency room dynamic, that model, and trying to apply it to the chronic disease setting, it didn't seem like they were having much luck. So, like a lot of people, I just tried to figure it out myself, and because of the timing, I was very lucky. The internet came online not soon thereafter, and I was able to go and read published medical journals in like 20 different languages translated, and get to read the research of all of these people. And what I found was that for something to become a drug, it takes millions of dollars. And the only way a company is going to make a drug and invest that money is if they think they can get a return. It has to be patentable. They're not going to spend millions of dollars to the FDA getting a drug to market if anybody can then go ahead and do the same thing. So the researchers had all of this data on what works, but the drug companies were ignoring a lot of it because they realized it wasn't patentable. So if we're going to the drug model, and the doctors, are practicing the drug model in a lot of cases, we're going to go through this financial filter where we only get the things that are patentable and money can be made. And the filter really should be what works. So I went right to the source. I went right to the data where all these researchers, I was imagining, people in various parts of the world over microscopes and, testing things just for the love of it, just to try to help. And I started putting things together and finding that there was a lot of really interesting protocols out there to get better for the chronic stuff, for the toxic issues that were not going to go to market, but that I could do for myself and then as a business, because I'm not a drug company. I don't need to make something that has to make $100 million to satisfy investors. I'm happy to make something that's going to get to, 10, 20,000 people and help them. And so my model, all that data works perfectly. And so that's how I got into this.
Think would probably
Well,
be,
you know what?
yeah.
Why don't we do it in the order in which I made them, because
Sure.
each one kind of led to the next.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the first one I did was metacardium. And
Okay. Let's bring that out.
right.
Yeah.
So just so you know, these are all suppositories, and let me explain why suppositories. There's a lot of ingredients that don't survive the digestive tract, or if they do, 5% gets through. And we're left with either getting a very small amount or doing an IV, which, I learned how to do IVs on my own arm. It's not something I'd suggest you do at home. But suppositories work really well. Suppositories and sublinguals both go through mucous membranes. The problem with the sublingual is having anything there that's not micrograms, it's going to get washed away by saliva. So it's very hard to do anything, like 500 milligrams of something by sublingual. It's not going to happen. You'll just swallow it. Suppository is really great, number one, because it's extremely well absorbed. It nearly rivals IV. And secondly, location. If you're dealing with prostate or liver, it's right there. So the first one I did was metacardium. And the EDTA that had been done by suppository at that point was a disodium EDTA. It's the same one they'd done in IV. And they had the same problems. It was burning people in the IV, and it was burning people as suppository. And what I actually ended up getting a patent for was this form, and this has magnesium and potassium in it. Most EDTAs now are sodium or calcium and sodium, and this is magnesium and potassium. And the idea is that a lot of people, when they think of chelation, they're thinking pulling out heavy metals: lead, cadmium, mercury, aluminum, arsenic, uranium, nickel. But one of the things that's really useful with chelation is to actually pull out calcium. And people wouldn't think that because it's not a toxic metal, but calcium acts like a toxic metal in a lot of people's bodies. It's called dystrophic calcium. It's calcium showing up where it doesn't belong. So, for instance, breast calcifications, prostate calcifications, calcifications in the arteries. If you look at the amount of calcium in tissue, it's a logarithmic, or it's an exponential curve. The older any animal gets, exponentially more calcium accumulates in the tissue. We functionally turn to stone. We become statues as we age. And there was a great book called The Calcium Bomb that talks about this. So by having a calcium-free EDTA, not only are we able to deal with the metals, but we've also got the calcium side of things. And I think that is equally as important. When you start, so that was the first product I made. I said, okay, I love chelation. I think they're using, and chelation by suppository is great, but they're doing it wrong. Let me see if I can fix this issue. And there was some chemistry behind it, and part of it was pulling off the calcium and replacing with magnesium, potassium. That was my first product, and had a great love for it, and had lots of really amazing stories about people getting better. And as I'm listening to people, when I first made it, I was kind of new to chelation. I said, okay, they're doing this for circulation, but most people were actually using it for a metal detox. And so I said, well, gosh, metals aren't the only toxins that are out there. There's, 8 metal toxins we're exposed to, but God, there's thousands of chemicals, and there's 1,000 new ones created every year. So what do we do about the chemical toxins? And that takes us to the second product I made, which was the Zenoplex. So you probably have heard of something called a coffee enema. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've only done about 700 of them. Yeah.
Right, wow. And right, so Gerson Clinic, it was discovered kind of inadvertently, I think, by a nurse in World War II when they were going to, World War I, I think, when they were going to give an enema to a soldier to clean him out before an abdominal surgery. And the nurse said, "Doctor, we don't have any more water to clean out the bowels." And the doctor said, "Find something." And so she used a cup of coffee, or some coffee, and the particular soldier had less pain and healed faster. Mm. And the Germans are very practical people. God bless the Germans in that way. So they said, hey, maybe there's something to this coffee enema thing. And if you look up the research of how coffee enemas work, part of what it does is it activates something called the glutathione transferase. And what it does is it attaches glutathione, one of the master detoxifiers, to chemicals. Now, in order to get chemicals out of the body, it's a 3-stage process. First, it's cytochrome P450, which typically adds an oxygen molecule or atom to a toxin. So let me back up a step. If a toxin's water soluble, whatever damage it does, it's temporary, because then it's gone. And let me rephrase this. The damage might not be temporary, but the toxin's temporary, right? You get the toxin in, you pee it out. The problem is when you have a fat-soluble toxin, because these get in and don't get out, especially if you don't ever fast, if you never go into ketosis. And the brain is fat, so that means toxins can have a predilection or for going into brain tissue. So the first step in detoxification, phase 1, is the cytochrome P450 enzymes, and it attaches an oxygen to a toxin, temporarily rendering it worse, more reactive. And the goal is then a glutathione will then attach, and then the body will excrete it out. So phase 1, an oxygen goes on the toxin. Phase 2, glutathione or something like it attaches to the toxin and makes it now water soluble. And phase 3, out it goes. A lot of people crash at phase 2 or phase 3. So they add the oxygen to it. It gets a little more soluble, but not necessarily soluble enough to leave, just enough to start ricocheting around the body and causing problems. So what the Zenaplex does, it stimulates, there's coffee, obviously, organic coffee. So that stimulates the cytochrome P450. It adds the oxygen to it. But then there's 5 or 6 different phase 2 elements in there. It used to be the glutathione, but then as I learned, I kept adding more. So sulfation, methylation, acetylation, all of those. And so now you do the coffee, it takes the toxin, it makes it partially more soluble. Then all the other parts are there because a lot of people don't have enough glutathione in their system. Adds all those others into it, finishes phase 2, and then out it goes. And so the reason we've had such phenomenal results with things like chemical sensitivities is because we're not just doing the coffee, but we're also supplying the rate-limiting phase 2 conjugates. And so I'm like, wow, now I've got this whole other world. Now I'm able to help people with chemical toxins. And that's really satisfying. I had some really bad chemical sensitivities. If I was around cigarette smoke or car exhaust, I would not be the best version of myself. And it wouldn't take much, just like a little smell of it, and it was like almost an allergic reaction.
Keep talking.
Thank you. So that, helped me out a great deal. So then the next thought was like, all right, well, what about phase 3? If we've got the metals with metacardium, we've got phase 1 and phase 2 with the coffee and the conjugates, but it still has to leave the body, right? It still has to either get defecated out or urinated out. And that means that the kidneys and the liver and the gallbladder, the biliary tree, have to be fully functional. And so then I said, okay, well, what do I do for people that to help the phase 3? And these are classically called drainage remedies. And they do them a lot with homeopathy, but I wanted to work at a more practical, I'm not going to say that homeopathy isn't practical. I wanted to work at a more physical level, right? If someone's got bile sludge, I want to clean out the sludge. I want to make sure that when the liver starts to detox, it goes straight out. And if you look at people's livers on ultrasound, if you kind of zone in there, you can see, that the liver, as it's aging, it's becoming, there's fat building up, maybe the tissue starts to change in texture. And so I wanted to support that. And you'll see people walking around with stones in their gallbladder and just sludge in there, like this paste, like glue. So the glytamins was the next product I made. It's that one in the orange box right there for phase 3. And the main ingredient in that is Chancapiedra, which...
The Amazonian
stonebreaker. Yeah, exactly. And the Amazonians, they use that both for kidney stones and gallstones. So we're hitting both sides of phase 3, the kidneys for the urination and the gallbladder and for the liver. Now, some people will say, well, I don't have a gallbladder anymore. Okay, and that's actually kind of common. And so they think they don't have a problem. The gallbladder was not the problem for people that have had a gallbladder removed. It was simply a bag that was catching stones. The stones were being produced in the liver. And someone that gets a gallbladder removed is still going to have stones. It's just not dropping into the gallbladder anymore. So we want to get the stones not just out of the gallbladder, but out of the liver too. Now, you can do, part of what I've been trying to do with these things is to make them more user-friendly, right? A suppository versus an IV, a suppository versus a coffee enema. The classic liver flush is Epsom salts and olive oil. And that's exactly, and that's an amazing experience, and a person can dump lots of stones. Granted, some of them are just coagulated olive oil, but some of them are not. My idea was to offer that to people in a suppository. You take it and you lay down, you watch a movie, and you can get the same flushing without having to gag on a cup of olive oil and Epsom salts. So that got the phase 3.
I do both.
Good for you, man. That's all, and that is the best way to do it if you can. Yeah. So that's for flushing out the gallbladder, and sometimes people. Obviously, there's more than Chanca-Piedra in there. Yeah. One of the things is, about once a year, I'll redo all the formulas just as new data comes out. And sometimes you find a new ingredient that's now available from a part of the world that wasn't sourceable before, or some data comes out that particular blends of ingredients work together very synchronistically. So that was the third detox. But talking about synchronicity, there's another product we don't have here called Allergica that was then the next product I made. I felt really good about being able to detox people. I was getting, a lot of people calling and saying, hey, things cleared up that they've had for decades, sometimes 50 years long. So that was very rewarding for me. We spoke earlier in the car. You said, what do I love? And, what I love is hearing people, getting better. So then I had those 3 products under my belt. I felt like I was doing a good service. And my wife at the time had taken the kids to visit her parents a couple of thousand miles away out in New York. And I get a call, our son is sick. And I'm like, oh boy. They're like, well, what should I do? Was what my ex had asked. And I'm like, well, gosh, it could be a virus. It could be a bacteria. Probably not a fungal infection. He wasn't in any weird lakes or, in a, attic somewhere. And could have been a parasite, theoretically. I don't think he's done, we haven't been on any third world travel. Okay, bacteria or virus. And it can be hard to know which one it is. So I said, I don't know. Go to the store, and I gave her a list of antivirals and antibacterials to buy. And I said, just give them all of them, shotgun approach. But it got me thinking. I'm like, I can't be the only person who's going through this, who's got some kind of infection and doesn't know what it is, and the doctors don't know what it is or whatever. Okay, I want to make a product that is antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, antiparasitic. Shotgun approach, I don't care what infection it is, there's something in there to do it. So I started looking, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to put like 10 different ingredients in here, right? 5 for bacteria because there's gram-positive, there's gram-negative, there's all these different kind of bacteria, different viruses. This is going to be a lot of stuff. And the first thing I look up is ellagic acid, which is a common plant substance. And I'm reading about it, and it says ellagic acid inhibits gyrase. Well, gyrase is the enzyme that lets bacteria spool its DNA up. And if it inhibits gyrase, it can cause the bacterial DNA to kind of fall apart into a big mess. And if the DNA can't be accessed, well, then the bacteria can't divide. So I'm like, okay, good. Ellagic acid for bacteria because it inhibits the gyrase enzyme. Check. Well, then I read a little bit more, and I read about the integrase enzyme. Ellagic acid inhibits integrase. Integrase is the enzyme that viruses use to penetrate the cell. You see, viruses, unlike bacteria, don't divide on their own. They get inside our cells and they start dividing. They make us make them. It's crazy. But to make us make them, for us to replicate the virus, they have to first get inside our cell. It's not enough to get inside our body. They have to get inside a cell inside our body. And a lot of them use integrase to get in. Well, ellagic acid inhibits integrase. So now we've got this substance that keeps viruses or suppresses viruses from entering cells. You could have all the viruses you want in your bloodstream. They're not going to do anything if they can't get to replicate. You'll eventually pee them all out or tag them with antibodies. I'm like, wow, okay, bacteria, virus. Let me keep looking. And I'm still reading about ellagic acid. And then it says, oh, it suppresses chitin synthase. Well, chitin synthase is how fungi and yeast grow their wall. It's part of their cell wall. Like, wait a minute. It's antifungal? It's anti-yeast too? Wow. I'm pretty impressed. Then I keep reading, and there's some way, and I don't know that we figured out how, but it seems to have an effect on parasites. Well, this is amazing. I also learned one other thing about it. Now, elephants almost never get cancer. There's 3 animals that rarely get cancer. We could talk about them one day. It's the naked mole rat, it's ants, and the elephants. Now, there's a gene in us that surveils for cancer cells. It's called the TP53 gene. And what it does is, when it finds a cell that looks either cancerous or might be, it does cell arrest. It stops it from replicating. These are our cells, right? Stops it from replicating, fixes the damage if it can, and kills it if it can't, or triggers apoptosis if it can't. That's a great cancer protocol. You want things going around your body, checking cells. Stop right there. You look a little funny. I'm going to try to fix you if I can and kill you if I can. That's great. Problem is, we only have 1 or 2 copies of the TP53 gene. Elephants have like 20. Now, the TP53 gene in humans can be damaged by the herpes family. And there's a lot of herpes infections out there. It's not just genital herpes. Like there's a whole chickenpox is basically herpes, right? So a lot of us are walking around with damaged TP53 genes. Half of all cancers are associated with damaged TP53 genes. Elephants have 20 copies. I think the reason elephants almost never get cancer is their TP53 system is so robust. And in ours, we have 1 or 2 genes, and if it gets taken down by a herpes family virus, we got a problem. Here's the point I want to get to. Ellagic acid is a basically perfect TP53 analog. It does the same things. It stops cells that are looking a little funny, it fixes them if they can, and kills it if it can't. So now I've got this ingredient, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, antiparasitic, anti-cancer. If there's one molecule from the plant kingdom, boy, this one wins molecule.
Where does it come from?
You can get it in pomegranate, you can get it in raspberry seeds, there's lots of places. You're never going to eat enough of it in nature, though, to have a really good effect, right? So you really have to get it from a concentrated source. You'd have to eat, a 5-gallon bucket of raspberries a day to get the amount that I can get you in a product. So I've got this amazing, this is the Molecule of the Decade award, goes to ellagic acid. And I did a little more research and I found that there was 2 things with it specifically. One is there were some ingredients that really kind of doubled or tripled its effect synergistically, right? We started this conversation about synergy. There are some things that are really synergistic that make ellagic acid work a lot better. And then the downside is ellagic acid causes blood to coagulate. Now that's what we don't want. Anytime you're fighting an infection, you want your blood thin so your immune system can get in there. You don't want biofilm forming so that the infection can hide. So what I did is I said, okay, I looked at exactly how ellagic acid causes blood to coagulate, the Hagman factor. And I put a plant compound in there that would selectively deal with that aspect of coagulation. So that's what the ellagica is. It's the ellagic acid with the synchronistic herbs that make it stronger. Quercetin is one of the main ones. And then with the plants that will keep that particular aspect, the blood coagulation, from getting triggered. And so that was the next product I made. At which point I said, I think I'm probably in the business of making products, right? I might as well just, so then we just, went on from there. Because I make suppositories, I started looking at what kind of things were already in the marketplace, but would not be absorbed well. So for instance, serapeptase is a great product. It helps break down all sorts of scar tissue, but it's only, again, 5% absorbed orally. But I made it as a suppository. That's this one. And so I calculated that one suppository was something like 1,000 capsules of the strongest serapeptase that I could find on the market orally. So that, it's like, that was my answer to serapeptase, because serapeptase is amazing, but I wanted people to get the most benefit.
How come you have EDTA in a lot of the suppositories? Is it synergistic?
Yeah, basically what you want to do is it helps things get transported across a little bit better. It is also, there's a lot of ways a lot of chemicals get put in products as lubricants or as preservatives. And the only preservative, quote unquote, I put in anything is a little bit of EDTA, because at the end of the day, it's actually good for you. And that way we extend the shelf life out, because everything in there is food grade. We don't use chemical bases. Most of the people that do suppositories, they don't use cocoa butter because it's much more technically difficult to work with. Cocoa butter has a tendency to get crumbly if you don't get the temperatures just right. And so a lot of people will use chemicals like methocel as a base, and then they'll load it up with preservatives like benzonates. And I'm like, no, I'm the only preservative I'm going to use is actually going to be good for us, and I'm going to use cocoa butter.
That question again. So I want to know, what makes your products different and special, and why does your company have integrity? Where are you getting your ingredients from, and what makes it different than other companies?
That's a great question, and I think we should all ask the people who are making products for us those questions. I'll give you an example of one of the things that I do, because I was looking in the marketplace. I know people who are manufacturers who will confide in me that, they don't put in as much as they say they do, or they had a bad batch but didn't recall it. So you really want to make sure that the people who you're trusting with your health are the right kind of people, right? And I give these products to my own family, right? I take them myself. In terms of ingredients, you have to pay more for ingredients if you want, a 20x or a CO2 extraction versus a 2x and a solvent extraction. You have to pay more if you want something that's fresh versus something that's been sitting in a dock in a Chinese warehouse getting moldy for 6 months. You have to pay more to get quality. And I've always thought that there's enough people, chasing to the bottom in industry, trying to make the cheapest stuff with really good and flashy graphics, but not good products. I want to be the guy that makes the best product. It's going to be more expensive, but this is the stuff that I would give to my own family, and I do. So, our products are a little bit more expensive, but that's because we're buying better quality ingredients. I'll give you an example. I was making capsules for a while, and I found out that the capsule companies were using lubricants that they didn't have to talk about in their machines to make all the steel slide back and forth in the equipment. And I said, okay. So when we started making capsules, we weren't using lubrication. We weren't using the stearates. And it caused the machinery to jam up. And boy, that takes a lot of time to disassemble and clean it and put it back together. And I got to the point where I'm like, I refuse to put in lubricants, but I can't deal with the maintenance of this stuff. It's just too much. The other thing is, if you take a look at capsules, either you're getting gelatin, which the potential for mad cow, or you're getting veggie caps, which has chemicals in it. So I decided to shift to powders. I said, okay, if I'm making powders, there's no lubrication in the equipment required. The breakdown is much easier, and there's none of the toxins in any of the capsules. Now, I know that I lose some customers by doing that. Some people don't want to taste whatever the products taste like. You know, medicinal herbs, they can have a bitter flavor. But it's part of my motto, my business ethic, that, you know, I will only make products that I would take and I would give to my own family. And once when I understood how that industry was working, I had to go to powders. I was just not going to put in all of this quote unquote safe chocolate. Look up magnesium stearate. You know, this is the quote unquote safe lubricant that people put into their equipment. I'm not going to touch that stuff, and I'm not going to sell it.
Can you explain why max stearate is bad?
You know, it's been about 2 or 3 years since I researched it, and I've forgotten. I just remember reading that a number of people react to it in a negative manner, and it's just not something that's, you know, you want to have in your system.
So it's a completely unusable form of magnesium, right?
Yeah, I think stearate is some kind of animal fat, and you know, we could probably edit in afterwards, you know, a couple of lines about what the stuff does.
Sure. Yeah, and your ingredients, are they coming from all around the world, or?
Yeah, you know, it's, I mean, for instance, John Capilla, just from the Amazon, you know, you have to know where to go to get which things, and who has the cleanest product, who has the stuff that's freshest. I'll give you another example. Nothing anybody gets from me is over 2 months old. We only make 1 to 2 months worth of product at any time, because I want everyone to get something fresh. And if you look at the big companies that are making products that are doing, you know, runs of 1 million capsules, 10 million capsules, 10,000 bottles at a time, well, they might have stuff on their shelves for 2 to 3 months before it gets to their buyers, and then in another 2 to 3 months before it gets to the end user, let alone the 2 to 3 months that the ingredients were in a warehouse before they even got made a product. So, you know, a lot of people will say, natural medicine, it doesn't work. I tried, I didn't get any results. And then they'll say, wow, you know, Spencer, I tried your stuff and it worked. Well, yeah, they're good formulas. But the other thing is, the ingredients are fresh, they're really high potency, and they're good formulas. And I'm sure a lot of other products out there would work better if they actually had in them what they say they had in them, and if it was fresh.
Awesome. Alrighty, well, I'm going to post a link to all the products in the info description, and you'll be seeing more of Spencer and I in a bit. Check out the other videos that we have around when this video was released. Alrighty? Thank you.
Right on.